Okay.
Well, you can imagine what happened. The three of us ran out, jumped on the bicycles, and away we went. Well, when the sound of the bell ringing madly like this, the fire brigade, heard of the fire brigade come out and they came over. They didn't know what was wrong, and then came the police tender carrying all the police. They came over and saw that nothing was wrong. By this time the bell stopped ringing, and they began an investigation, as police usually do. The fire brigade, having found that there was no fire or nothing had been, no harm had been done, they went back to their station. But the police went along on both sides of the street, from door to door, asking people had they noticed anything. So the people had been in their homes, doors were shut, and of course naturally they hadn't seen anything. But they came to Nora Matthews, Mrs. Nora Matthews. We used to often call in to talk to her. She was a gossip, but she reminds me of the story, the Irish story, the Valley of the Squinting Windows. An Irish writer wrote about his home place and described all the idiosyncrasies of each person, how they looked out through the windows to see what was going on. And the people who lived there were able to identify themselves, although the names weren't given. So the poor writer dared not return home ever again. So she would remind me of the Valley of the Squinting Windows, because she sat there beside the lace curtain window, and if anybody were passing, she would just lift up the lace curtain just like this to see who was passing. So the policeman eventually arrived at the door of Nora Matthews and asked her, had she seen or heard anything? Well, I heard the bells ringing, and then I just happened to look out the window. Naturally, she happened to look out the window, and she said she saw the three Greenan boys going past on their bicycles, and they were going like the hammers of hell. So that was enough. The policeman came out, reported it to the chief, and the search was called off. Well then, when they reported back to the head constable, he knew my father, both were in the public service. He phoned my father, Mr. Greenan, he said, I think you should be talking to that eldest son of yours. You might have heard that bell ringing. I think you should be talking to him. So that's another thing we didn't do again. But anyway, these were some incidents of my life. But in the beginning of my life, the earliest things I remember, well, we're there, as I said, confined space, and the wall of the workhouse was the separating line between County Down and County Armagh. So we were in the suburbs of Newry at that time, so we were born inside County Armagh. Recently, when I was in Rome in 207, I met the Archbishop of Armagh, whom I knew previously when he was rector of the Irish College. So I said to him, Sean, you know, I belong to your diocese. He looked at me and he said, I know that. He already had found out. Well, anyway, we were young. We used to go to Mass in the Dominican church. And this is now one of my earliest memories. And it is significant as regards my vocation as the priesthood. There was a man called Father Barry, Norbert Barry. He had been an altar boy there in St. Katherine's, Dominican church, and he decided to become a Dominican priest. He went to Tallaght. Tallaght, that is where we had our house of studies, T-A-L-L-A-G-H-T. Tallaght means the tomb. Tallaght Melrun, the tomb of Melrun, St. Melrun. He went there, he became a priest. Now, he was coming home to Newry to say his first Mass. And, of course, the church was pretty crowded for this big event. My father and mother and ourselves. I don't think Joe was born at the time, just Tommy, Kevin and myself were there. And Father Barry came out wearing the beautiful vestments which had been donated by Miss Quinn. Miss Quinn was an old lady, always dressed in black. She was wealthy, and she was a great benefactor of the Dominican Church. She lived quite near, about 400 or 500 yards from the church, and she'd walk to the church and people would point her out, you know, that's Miss Quinn. But she presented this beautiful set of vestments to the Dominican Church, and Father Barry was wearing those vestments. And after the Mass, he went along the altar rails giving his first blessing to each individual. And I said to my father, no, I was about 7 at the time. I think I was just 7. I said to my father, I am going to be a Dominican priest like Father Barry. And I am going to say my first Mass on that altar, and I shall be wearing those same vestments. So, it's strange. My parents after that never asked me what I was thinking of becoming. What would I like to do? Because I had announced that I was going to become a Dominican priest. So they took it for granted I had made up my mind. They would ask the others what they would like to do when they grew up. And they would say this, that or the other, but they never asked me. Strangely enough, they took it for granted that I had made up my mind, and so I had. So that was, I was 7, that was 1924. 1924, in 1940, I was ordained a priest, 1940, so we can calculate that, so that's many years, 24 to 40 is what?
16.
Yeah?
16.
16 years later, I came back and I said my first Mass on that altar, and I was wearing those same vestments as I had before. And the man who was prior of the church when I was there as an altar boy, he afterwards came to Tallaght with my master's students. Now he came back to assist me at my first Mass, and he was wearing the lovely coupe, which corresponded to that set of vestments. So that is how I became Dominican. Strange. So I went to Tallaght, joined the order at the age of 16. Rather precocious. There was another guy there. He was 2 months younger than I was. I was 11th of January, he was 11th of March. He afterwards became Professor of Theology in Freiburg in Switzerland. There were 9 in our batch, 5 of them left, 4 remained, 4 became priests, and of those 4 priests, I am the only survivor. The other 3 are dead. So I alone remain, as the scripture says. So went down to Cork. They thought I was too young, and to knock some sense into my head, 4 of us were sent down to the university in Cork. We did first arts, then we were summoned back to continue to do our studies. Began our philosophical studies, 3 years of philosophy, 4 years of theology, studying the Summa of St. Thomas Aquinas. It was interesting. Our classes were in Latin, so we're thrown into Latin right away. But after about 2 weeks or so, we understood what was going on. We were quite at home, and we had to speak Latin. We had to answer questions in Latin. And then I was ordained. We had a privilege of being ordained before the end of our theology. So I was ordained after the second year of theology at the age of 23. I had to get a dispensation from Rome because the minimum age was 24. Now I believe it's 25. I was ordained at the age of 23. I finished my studies sometime later, and then 40 I was ordained, and then in 1943 I had done qualifying exam to be a teacher in the Dominican order, and I began to teach right away. And strangely enough, I had to teach the class I was teaching were people, students who had been with me in the same class for the previous 2 years, fellow students. And this class was a very tough class. And I think that is why the Regent of Studies didn't want to face them. Especially one guy called Jordan Gannon, who afterwards was a member of my community in Dundalk when I was the prior. But I was told, as I was having now qualified as a professor, I was told I would have to teach this group, who had been my fellow students. So I went to teach them. I had to teach them mystical and ascetical theology. And I remember, as I was going into the class, I thought of the film Goodbye, Mr. Chips. And I knew that the first day was critical. So I went in, I sat down, addressed the class. They were there watching me. What's he going to do? Is he going to throw his weight around? Is he going to pretend he knows everything? And well, I could see the thoughts going through their minds. And I said, well, I said, well, I said, you and I have something in common. I said, you know nothing about this subject, neither do I. So they burst out laughing. But I said, the problem is this, I've got to learn it, and I've got to pass it on to you, so a little bit of cooperation all around would be appreciated. So they laughed. Halfway during the class, the big bell, the convent bell, was outside our door, our classroom door, and that would be rung at 10 minutes to the hour, signifying that class was ended. But this man, Jordan Gannon, the difficult character, he was in the second row, and he had tied a bell to the chair of the guy in front of him, Xavier Hennessy, a very good guy, born in India. Xavier Hennessy was actually older than I was, by about a year. So he tied the bell to Hennessy's chair, and halfway through the class, he kicked the bell. So I thought of Mr. Chips, and I said, this is it. I said, did I hear a bell ringing? All the heads were down. Nobody was looking at their exercise book. Well, I said, I do not wish to hear that bell again. Is that quite clear? So I went on with the class. Now afterwards, there was a break, and this class, this gang, they went out, and they were walking up and down what's called the Friars' Walk, all covered, lined with trees. So the rector, Regent of Studies, who had appointed me, and who had been afraid to face them, he came out and he joined them, walking up and down the Friars' Walk, and he said, and how did my brother Lambert do? how did my brother Lambert do? He was expecting them to just cut the back of me. But this man, Jordan Gannon, he was clever. He realised the situation. And he said, oh, he said, Father Lambert was magnificent. He said, great teacher, everything prepared. He said, oh, everything prepared. And he could explain everything so clearly. So the Regent of Studies got mad. He got furious. And he left them. And then I came out. And I just happened to bump into the class, so I joined them. And Jordan said to me, Lambert, see, a very funny thing happened. See, Giles came out, that was his name, Giles Durden, Egidius. Giles came out, and we were walking up and down, and he joined us. He said, and how did my brother Lambert do? And he said, I knew what he was up to, he said. And I said to him, oh, he said, we told him a whole bundle of lies. We told him, he said, a whole bundle. We told that you're magnificent, that you were a perfect professor, that you knew everything at your fingertips, that you were wonderful, you know, whole bundle of lies, you know. I said, thank you very much, I said. With such friends, I said, who needs enemies? So we kept on walking up and down together, good friends. But I had won the first day. Afterwards, I never had any difficulty as a professor. The word went around, Lambert has got cold blue eyes. So they were afraid of me. I don't know why, but it was those cold blue eyes got me removed from teaching about 14 years later. Which perhaps I was very angry, I was very much annoyed. But as I look back now, it was of course divine providence. And if I had not been removed from teaching, interesting enough, when I was removed from teaching, I was put for 2 years in charge of the adjacent retreat house. So I was in charge of a retreat house, and now I'm ending up my life across the globe in another retreat house. And divine providence has a sense of humour. Kind of irony. But anyway, only for that I wouldn't have been sent to Dundalk to be prior there. And that is now where another story of my life begins. In Dundalk I've been prior for 2 terms, that was for 6 years altogether. But shortly after I arrived, fortunately, I saw a stain high up in the church. And I sent a painter up to paint over it. And he came down and he said to me, Prior, he said, the situation was very serious. He said, those big beams, he said, you can take handfuls of wood out of them. He said, they're just dry rot. But 4 or 5 of these big beams near the sanctuary. I said, the whole roof could come crashing on top of us. So it was fortunate I sent him up to do that bit of painting. So then I had to close the church. And the church services were held in our school hall. I was the manager of 3 schools, a boys' school, girls' school, and infant school. And we had a school hall. So the school hall became our church for the duration, for the last 3 years of my time there as prior. And we had to remove the entire roof from this Gothic church and put on a new roof. And the whole inside of the church was like a builder's site. And then our priory or convent next door, we found there were 2 problems there. The roof was a problem, so myself and the architect and the builders and some members of the community council went up onto the roof. It's in this hollow in the roof. And there, sitting in this hollow of the roof, we held a council meeting. And some thought that the good tiles should be saved and the broken tiles should be replaced, and others thought that the whole roof should be removed and a new roof and new tiles put on. So that seemed to be the general opinion. Of course, I was the youngest member of the whole community, although I was the superior. So I turned to the contractor. I turned to the contractor. He was from Uri, and he had done some work for my father in the workhouse, putting on slates and all the rest of it. So he knew my father well. So I turned to him. I turned to him and said to him, "What do you think?" Well, he said, "I would say what your father would say. And your father, if he were here, he would say, take off the whole roof, put on a new roof, do it right." Okay, I said, do it right. So they had to put on an entire new roof on the priory. Then inside the priory there was woodworm in all the rooms. So we had one spare room, so the community one by one had to move into that spare room as we had to deal with each room and get rid of the woodworm. And here I was at the end of 6 years. The church was nearly finished, and I had the money collected to finish it. And we had dealt with the woodworm in the convent, and we had put on a new roof when my provincial, who was a member of my own group, my own year, my own batch as we say, he phoned me and told me that in the Conference of Religious Superiors they were being asked to put forward a name as the editor, founding editor, to found an English language edition of the Vatican Italian newspaper, L'Osservatore Romano, the Roman Observer. So the man who was the president was a redemptorist, so he felt he couldn't very well propose or suggest one of his own order. So my provincial, who was my fellow classmate, my provincial put forward my name because I had been in Rome studying and doing canon law. And he phoned me, told me this, but of course he said, "You needn't worry, you're not going to get it." He said, your name won't be considered. He said, "Don't worry." I said, "Thank you very much." So, anyway, I was walking around Dundalk one day, I was doing some business, shopping or that, and a police car pulled up beside me, just eased up to the footpath, threw open the door, and the driver said, "Prior." He said, "Hop in." So I thought this was surprising. I hopped in, and he said, "There's an old station alert out for you," he said. I said, "What's wrong?" He said, "I don't know," he said, "I don't know. But we got word from headquarters in Dublin that we were to pick you up. We went to the priory, found you weren't there, but so we were to pick you up, so all the cars are cruising around looking for you." I said, "What have I done?" "Oh," he said, "we don't know." So I came back, and I was told, Provincial had phoned me, and that I was to be prepared for a visit from the Apostolic Nuncio. He was coming to speak to me about this job. So I was a bit surprised because the Provincial told me that my name wouldn't be considered. So the Nuncio arrived. His name was Archbishop McGeough. He was a New York man, first generation Irish. His parents, both his parents, they came from Ireland. He told me which counties they came from. He was born in New York. The thing was, when I was in Rome previously, from 46 to 49, studying canon law, I knew him. He was working in the Secretary of State and was a great friend of Montini. This was back in the time now of Pius XII. Montini afterwards became Pope Paul VI, and he was the Pope when I began this job at the Vatican. How I came to meet McGeough was interesting. I don't know whether I should tell it or not. At this time, you see, it was 46, 49, after the war, and the American Army and the English Army, part of both, but mostly the American Army, they were the civil government of Rome. They were the government of Italy, and they were the municipal government of each city. So you had Rome was under the command of the Americans. And at the end of the Via della Conciliazione, straight down from the Vatican, the Americans had taken over the last big building, and they turned this into a club for the soldiers, for the officers, an officers' club. And I came down and saw one of these military police, you know, with the white helmets, snowdrops. He was standing on guard at the door, and I wanted to go into the American club. I'm going to have a drink. I thought that being an Irishman, I would be welcomed by the Americans. We thought we knew the Irish loved the Americans, and we took it for granted that the Americans loved the Irish. So I went to Gwyn. Snowdrop stopped me. He said, "Where are you from?" I said, "I'm Irish." "Can't come in here," he said, "this American." So I was rebuffed. And as I turned to go, this man arrived from the Secretary of State, Monsignor McGeough, and we knew each other by sight. And he said to me, "What's wrong?" I said, I've just been thrown out." He said, "Why?" "Because I'm Irish." "Ah," he said, "come with me," he said. So he went up to the snowdrop. He said to him, "This man is Irish." Snowdrop nodded his head, yes. Then he said, "Every Irishman is an American, therefore this guy is an American." Is that quite clear? I said, he said, "He can come in." "All right," says the snowdrop, saluted him. So he said to me, "Come on, in we go." So we went in, and he said, "What do you have?" Well, I was a bit embarrassed, you know. And I said, "Whatever you're having yourself." So he ordered 2 Scotch whiskies. So that was my introduction to the American club. My introduction to McGeough. I never forgot McGeough, but he forgot me. The elephant never forgets. I remembered him. And I went down, when I knew who was coming, I went down and was standing inside the gates, the church gates, outside the priory door. I saw the nuncio's car drive past. I saw him in the car, thought they were going to stop, but they made a mistake, drove past. After a short time, realized they had gone too far, came back and stopped. I was still waiting. He gets out. I said, "Excellency, you're welcome." He said, "Were you expecting me?" I said, "Yes." He said, "How did you know that I was coming?" "Oh," I said, "I'd like to keep tabs on your movements." So we came in. Our dinner was finished, and we're having coffee and liqueurs in the library when he arrived. And he was a bit surprised to find the place was filled, because he wanted probably to speak to me alone. And he came in, he looked around, questioning mark on his face. Well, I said, "We have had our dinner and we are just having recreation." He said, I wish to speak to you alone. Would you please get these people out?" He was very brusque. So I turned to the community and nodded. And they thought, of course, I was going to be appointed a bishop. I knew, of course, what was coming. So when they got out, I offered him, "What do you have?" I said, "Whiskey or brandy?" He said, I'm not taking anything," he said. Well, I said, "You're going to talk to me. You're going to accept the hospitality of this house. So which is it, whiskey or brandy?" He said, "Brandy." Okay. So we had a whiskey and a brandy. Now I said, what is the purpose of your visit? Well, he said, we're looking for an editor of the L'Osservatore Romano. Well, I said, the L'Osservatore Romano, it's an Italian paper. I don't know Italian. Oh, no, he said, no. Holy See is going to establish an English language edition, a weekly edition of the L'Osservatore Romano. And here in Ireland, he said, 4 names have been put forward, one by the religious, your name, and 3 other secular diocesan priests, who incidentally afterwards 2 became bishops and the 3rd became an archbishop. I said to one of them afterwards, at a diplomatic reception in Rome, oh, I said, it's the old story. The religious are chosen to do the work. You guys get the kudos. He was quite angry. But anyway, that didn't matter. So he said my name was put forward. Well, I said, I don't know Italian. Well, I'd left Italy in '49. We didn't really study Italian. We picked up a little bit because our classes at the university were in Latin, and at home we spoke English. We were an Irish community. So we never really had much necessity for Italian, except when going into shops or beer shops. And so I said, I don't know Italian. Oh, he said, oh, it doesn't matter. He said, it doesn't matter. Well, I said, I know nothing about journalism. Oh, he said, that doesn't matter. Then I said, I know nothing about editing a newspaper. I said, oh, he said, that doesn't matter. So I said, Excellency, may I inquire what does matter on this job? And he said, certainly. Just your prudential judgment. And the first mistake you make will be your last, because you will be fired. Oh, I said, Excellency, that is a job I could not refuse. You know, I never make a mistake. So he laughed. He said, okay, he said, you can go, because he knew the kitchen I was going into. You can go. Of course, I can't say that. Only the Holy Father can say that. But I knew from the old days when he was working with Montini together, they used to go on holidays together every year. So I knew they were like that. So if he recommended my name, I started packing my bags. So what I went. Now let us jump forward a great number of years. Years after I'd been appointed and was still working there, this Monsignor McGeough was dying. And instead of going back directly to New York, to die in New York, he came first to a hospital, the Blue Sisters, in Rome, so that the Pope, Paul VI, his friend, would be able to come to visit him and give him the last sacraments and give him the apostolic blessing.
You got some on your mouth.
What?
On the corners of your mouth.
So, his great friend was, forget his name, he was an archbishop, been with him when he was nuncio. Hello? Oh yes, I got your voicemail. I got your voicemail, and I was phoning back afterwards. What news have you got from me? Yes. 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 Well, could you send me a copy of it, please? Yeah. Pardon? Yes. Yeah. Yes, well, I've been praying to Francis a good deal recently. Yes. Oh, yesterday. That was the 3rd of January, wasn't it? And that was the day that 3 of our sisters went down to Puerto Rico to help the Dominican nuns down there in the construction of their new monastery. And they were down there for 11 months. So they returned just recently. But now, that's great news. I'll tell the sisters that about Francis. Yes. Pardon? To what? Oh, it's Station of the Cross, so I say yes. Yeah. 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 Yes. Well, you heard of Father Fox having died recently, and he was buried back in Alexandria, where he'd been in the past. Well, I don't know. He was supposed to have cancer. He told me sometime, about a month earlier, that he was completely cleared from cancer, but apparently it came back, and I think it was from cancer that he died. Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes, I'd like that, and the sisters would also like to have it too. So you see, I cannot read now because my eyesight has failed from macular degeneration. I cannot read, I cannot write, but the sisters will read it to me. Yes. Yes. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, you're doing really great work, Trojan work for Francis. He was very, very special, and I'm quite sure he's in heaven now, looking down at us. Pardon? Yeah. Well, I pray for him and I pray to him. Pardon? Oh no, not publicly, but privately, yes. Yeah. I know, yes. Well, okay then. All right, keep in touch. I thank you ever so much. Happy New Year. Bye-bye. Sandy Boucher, she's the one who is contacting to get news of Bush Francis when he was in the hospital and that. So now they have carrying on the campaign for his canonization, and the bishop told them to see how to go about it, and they're collecting testimonies from 1,500 people on that, and so they're praying privately. They can't have a public prayer, but private prayer for his canonization. So if they have a prayer approved by the bishop, so she's going to send me a copy of it. And so that's wonderful news. Now, where were we?
This guy was dying. Monsignor?
Oh, the Monsignor, yes. Is it, this thing turned on?
Yeah.
Yes. But now, as I was saying, Monsignor McGeough, he, when he got very ill, was terminally ill. He had had a stroke, I think it was, and he came to the Blue Sisters in Rome, and this man, Archbishop D'Andrea, that was his name, he'd been my boss at one time, and then afterwards he went as secretary of the nuncio in South Africa, where McGeough was the nuncio. They were fast friends. So one day, D'Andrea came to me and he said, "Would you like to meet Archbishop McGeough? He's very ill. He's in the hospital." I said, "Yes, I'd like to meet him." But he said, "I'll go in first. He knows me well, but you will not stay too long." So I said, "Okay." So I waited, and eventually this man, Monsignor and D'Andrea, came out. He was now an archbishop afterwards. And he said, "You can come in." So I saw the man I knew. He was propped up in bed, but his mouth was going sideways, and he seemed to be kind of drooling from the lower part of his mouth, and he found it difficult to speak. And he said to me, obviously I was not invited to speak, so I waited for him, and he spoke with great effort. And he said, "During my time as nuncio in different places, I had to make many appointments, many decisions, but of all the appointments I made, my appointment of you to L'Osservatore Romano is the one of which I am most proud. And now I will give you my blessing." And he gave me his blessing in Latin. So he said, "Thank you, goodbye." So I shook hands with him and I left. But I said to myself, what a tremendous testimony. What a tremendous testimony. So the Pope had been to see him, and the Pope had given him the apostolic blessing, and then after that, shortly after that, they flew him out to New York, where he died shortly afterwards. Now, he was the man who appointed me, and the strange thing, when I went to Rome, I said, "Where is my office?" They brought me to a room, and the room was completely empty. There was nothing in the room, by that I mean nothing, except a telephone on the floor in a corner. On the walls was nothing, just the marks, the signs where pictures had been hanging. And there was dank smell. Oh, I said, I'm not coming in here. So then they sent me up to the Secretary of State. So I was put into the same office with my boss, the one who was my immediate boss. And this was a very interesting situation. He was Monsignor Tricarico. Tricarico is an Italian word which translated would mean triple laden or three loaded. But Albert Tricarico. And I had my table beside him, and he was always saying, he spoke English very well. He'd been secretary to the nunciature in Melbourne and in Australia. He kept on telling me, you must work now, you must work, in this job, you must work, you must work, you must work. So I got fed up with this. I said to him, would you shut up, I said, and give me some chance of working. How can I go on working with you chattering all saying, you must work, you must work, you must work. So then one time I got up, I straightened myself, like this, I was tired, I straightened myself out like this, and I noticed that Tricarico, he had a chair with wheels on it, as had I, but he just backed right into a corner, into a defensive position. And I smiled, and I said, Albert, I said, you thought I was going to hit you. Well, he said, I had heard about the wild Irish out in Melbourne. Well, I said, no, I won't hit you this time, I said, but I will the next time if you don't shut up. So after that, I had no trouble. But a very interesting thing happened. As soon as I went into his office, I was given the folder of all the thing about all the work they'd done towards the founding or establishing of this English edition. But one section of the folder they had forgotten, and that was the account of each candidate. I read, first of all, the account of myself. It was like the Last Judgment. It was wonderful. The man, my own Provincial, who was my fellow student, fellow classmate, my own student gave me a glowing report. Then I had it from my Cardinal Conway. He was my Cardinal when I was in Dundalk. Then I knew the Archbishop of Dublin well. So he gave me a very good report, and McQuaid was his name, John Charles McQuaid. He was a member of the Holy Ghost Fathers, and he mentioned one thing, that he had appointed me as a diocesan reader for a diocesan censor for books to give the imprimatur. So therefore he said he must be very good. And interesting enough, afterwards, after he ceased to be Archbishop, a friend of his, Faraday, Father Faraday, also Holy Ghost, he went home from Rome at Christmas to visit him, to visit John Charles, because they were great friends. And when he came back to Rome, I met him. I said, oh, he said, I was with John Charles. Everybody called him John Charles. John Charles McQuaid was his name. He said, I was with John Charles. He was speaking about you. And he said that next time you come back to Ireland, he wants you to come to his house down in Killarney, on the seacoast. Down in Killarney, he wants you to come to visit him because he wants to speak to you. He wants to do dinner with you. So next time you arrive in Ireland, phone him and make arrangements to meet him. So I said, certainly. And I was wondering what this would mean. And then a few weeks later, I heard that John Charles had died. So I do not know what he wanted to talk to me about. But one of those sad incidents in history. Well, now, I went to Rome. And then after I began at the top, I began in the Secretary of State, which was a great help to me because I knew them all. I was friends with all of them. I could take up the phone and phone anyone I wanted. So that was a great help to me. I knew the men at the top. And then, if any problem arose, I could just phone anybody I wanted. And then they had my office. I got a sister to help me, Sister Katherine, a very dear soul. She came after the first 4 issues. And Sister Katherine Meyer, she was from Mankato in, where's Mankato? It's up in Mankato, it's in, it's near at this, but anyway, I always liked to hear her, I think it's mysterious, anyway, I liked her, the way she pronounces Mankato, and always I kept asking her, where are you from? Mankato. But she was a dear soul, she was a little bit older than I was, I thought she was younger. And then she was with me for 17 years. But she arrived after the 4th issue of the paper. And I knew nothing. I knew nothing about the division of words. I didn't realize there was a problem. And I hate to look back on the first 4 issues of the paper. I have them in a bound volume back in Rome, San Clemente. But I don't like to look at them because the division of words is terrible. For instance, justice, just ice, things like that. So when she arrived, she had been accustomed, she was an editor of her magazine, and she had to teach me about the division of words. Something, well, you see, in school you're always taught that. Well, in Ireland we weren't taught anything about that. And then I became an expert. I became an expert in the division of words, and even came to know more about it than she did, the one who taught me. And she was with me for 17 years. Then after a while, I'll tell you about the beginning of the paper. The first 4 issues I had to produce myself, no one to help me. Knew nothing about it. So the first paper was published on the 1st of April. Well, you know, the 1st of April. There was no way in which I was going to put the date, the 1st of April, on that paper, because I thought it would be, it might be stressing the obvious. So, showing my power, I could even change the dates of the week. So I put the 4th of April on it, the Wednesday instead of Monday, or it was. But anyway, from then on, it always came out on the Wednesday, it was dated the Wednesday instead of the 1st. And I came into my office one morning. We had printed the first issue, and Sister Katherine said to me, the press conference. I looked at her and said, what press conference? You've got to give a press conference this morning for the publication of the first issue. And I said, when? In 10 minutes, she said. So I was absolutely flabbergasted. So I hadn't even thought about it. I'd forgotten all about that press conference, fortunately. Because if I had remembered it, I would have prepared it. And if I had prepared it, it would have been a disaster. It was much better that it was unprepared, because I was an Irishman and on a roll, didn't matter. So I went over, And as I was going over through the square, a lady, I've forgotten her name now, she was an Anglican, and she had come to me the previous week asking to be taken on as a translator. So I handed her the text of the Pope's weekly audience speech in Italian, which had just come in, something like that. I said, here, take this, translate that, bring it back to me, and we'll see what you make of it, and then I'll decide. So as I was hurrying towards the press office, she was there and she stopped me, and she handed me her translation, about 5 pages, of the Pope's previous weekly audience address. So I said to her, that's okay, I'll take it, and when I get back to my office, I'll have a look at it and call in to see me tomorrow, and then we'll decide. So I went into the press office, and the man in charge, Italian, said, il testo, where's your text? So I showed him the translation of the Pope's audience address. Well, he didn't understand. He said it was English. He didn't know English, fortunately. And well, I said, this is an English newspaper. He said, what about the Italian journalist? I said, I am not interested in the Italian journalists. This is where they are going to learn. This is an English paper. So the press office was packed. Right in front of me was Cardinal Antonio. He was an Italian cardinal. He had been nuncio in Spain. I knew him. I'd met with him a few times since I had arrived in Rome, and we were friendly. And next to him was Cardinal Archiganian. He was an Armenian. He had come to Ireland as the papal nuncio for the 1600th anniversary of the death of St. Patrick. Now, Cardinal Archiganian, he knew English precisely. He spoke it correctly, in a very precise manner. And he knew every word precisely. He had a big black turban, the Armenians. So he was sitting there beside Cardinal Antonio. Then next to Archiganian was the Father Arruppe. He was the Superior General of the Jesuits, and he happened to be very much on my side. It turned out that he had met my brother in Nagasacki. My brother had been the doctor on the first ship to enter Nagasaki after the atomic bombing of Nagasaki. So the captain gave a reception for the important people, and Father Arruppe came on board, and of course the captain turned to my brother, who was a Catholic, and said, the doctor said, you better look after him. So Father Arruppe and my brother spoke, and my brother spoke and said he had 2 brothers who were Dominicans, and he spoke about Tallaght and the Hellfire Club up on the hill beside Tallaght, all this kind of thing. So when I arrived in Rome, one of the Jesuits said to me, our general knows your brother. Oh, I said, impossible. I was thinking he might have met my brother, the priest, who was out at that time in Connecticut. And if he had met him, he would surely have told me. So, I said, impossible. I said, our general never forgets. He knows your brother. So he went back and told Father Arruppe that he must have been mistaken, that he hadn't met my brother. So Arruppe said, well, you can tell Father Lambert I met his brother who was the doctor, ship's doctor, and I met him in Nagasaki, and told me the whole story, and told the conversation that he had with my brother, and about Hellfire Club near Tallaght, the whole thing. So then I knew that they had met. My brother had forgotten to tell me. I wrote to him and said yes, he had entertained Arruppe on board the ship. For that reason, Arruppe was very favourable to me. And so I began giving an explanation. There was a man presiding who was, he was one of these people, priests of the Sacred Heart. I think there are people who run Notre Dame University. He was one of that society, that group. So he was presiding. He was a priest then. He afterwards became a bishop. He was a good friend of mine. But this was the first time I met him. So I began, I had the Pope's speech in front of me, the translation of the Pope's speech. So I began talking about the whole idea, the development of this English edition, and then I took down and take the top page, put it underneath to see as though I were reading from the text. I went on giving all the thing and put it underneath. I could have kept on doing that forever. Oh, I should have mentioned that when I arrived, I meant to tell you, in the folder I got all the accounts of every single candidate, myself included, and the other 22. They were all there, and in one from England, the nuncio there, then an apostolic delegate, a man called Cardinale, Archbishop Cardinale, and he advised, I hear that an Irishman, an Irish Dominican, is being considered for this job. I very strongly advise you not to appoint a religious, not to appoint this man from Ireland, because he will only be furthering the interests of his own order. I read all this. This was delightful. So therefore, when I published the first issue, on the front page I had a great big picture of Ash Wednesday, for it was the beginning of Lent in Santa Sabina, our head house. Here was a great big picture of Santa Sabina with all the Dominicans in the choir, all the Dominicans, you know, and everything. As he said, furthering the interests of his own order, so I wanted to prove him correct. So anyway, he was very, very much against me. And then when I was appointed, he sent me an article which he had written on canon law. He was a good canonist, and he asked me to publish it, which I did. My assistant, Sister Katherine, said, well, he's the man who's against you. Why should you publish his? So, well, I said, it's a very good article from the canonical point of view, so I said, I think it should be published, so I published it. But anyway, we were there, I was talking about going along page by page and giving the whole history of the foundation of this paper, when the man who was presiding said to me, you're talking too much. Oh, I said, I haven't begun yet. So, eventually I finished. And then came the question time. Now, that press hall, big press hall, it was packed. I saw over the right-hand corner a small group of, say, 3 or 4 American journalists. I knew them. I'd come to know them, and I took them for granted. They're Americans, therefore they would be on my side, my support. Because we're Americans, Irish and Americans. This was the idea I had, little did I know. They thought that one of them should have been appointed editor in my place, instead of me. So the first question came from them. What is your experience as an editor? Now, I had not 1 second experience as an editor. I knew nothing about editing a newspaper. But I could not let the side down. The Secretaries of State had appointed me. I couldn't let them down. So, what was my experience as editor? So I took a deep breath. And I said, well, I consider myself the world's greatest expert in dry rot and woodworm. Well, the reaction was sensational. It was as if every man had been hit with a mallet on the head. There was consternation, and then everybody collapsed in laughter. Cardinal Antoniuti was directly sitting in front of me, and he doubled up with laughter. I thought he was having a heart attack. He was bursting out with laughter, and Johnny Adams beside him, he was this, what's going on, what's this? He understood every single word of the question. He understood every single word of the answer, but could not see the remotest connection between answer and question. And he was looking like this, you see. So then they all burst out laughing, so everybody forgot about the question. So then the next American got up, what is your experience as a journalist? So I looked forward, fixed him in the eye, and I said to him, what about my humility? Now, I said, if I tell you what a great guy I am, do you see that priest over there? He was dressed in black and white, the Dominican. You see that priest over there? He taught me about 50 years ago. Well, that was a big exaggeration. He got mad. Say, what is he going to think? And next question, please. So I took over the chairmanship of this meeting. He was the one who should say next question, but as a means of self-defense, I took over the meeting. And I went on with the questions. Well, for that long, it was great fun. It was great fun. Then one guy asked me, how old are you? So I replied, as the Kerry men reply, why? Why do you ask? Well, he said it's important. I mean, starting off new English language editions was important to know what age the editor is. I said, why? So he kept on asking, developing the question. I would always say, why? Just like a Kerry man. And then he said, well, I said, to satisfy your curiosity. I then went into Italian and said, 51, 51. Now behind Cardinal Antoniuti, there was a journalist. She was a blonde bombshell of a journalist. She was a beauty. She was, I would say, she was about 38 years of age. She was from Poland, and representing her paper, the only thing. So she got up, she was just behind Antoniuti, and she faced all this rabid crowd of journalists, and she says, Father doesn't understand English, or doesn't understand Italian very well. What he means is that he is